There are 13 people left alive. Some might say they were unlucky, but they were certainly luckier than those who did not survive the crash landing on a remote Pacific island. The beaten survivors clustered on the beach. Slowly, they began to organize themselves, trying to find shelter, water, and food. The pilot, the oldest remaining, did not survive. Margaret seemed to naturally take charge, checking on how people were doing and starting to organize everything. Remarkably, 4 friends survived. Tom, his wife Helen, Bill, and his wife Mary. They were lucky that they were in the rear. Few from the front of the plane survived. They were a middle-class couple in their 40s, enjoying a Pacific Island vacation together when they booked a cheap charter for sightseeing. They were in good physical shape and liked to travel independently. Yes, but most of their trips were invented and planned by Tom. He and Helen were a good match, both adventurous and energetic. Tom is 3 inches taller than Helen, who was 5 feet 8 inches tall. Endurance sports, cycling and running, kept him in good physical shape, but without swinging in the gym. Helen's long, curly brown hair was usually styled in a ponytail, leaving bangs above her beautiful deep brown eyes. She was smart and quick-witted, but sometimes she could be quite harsh and straightforward. They got along well with the quieter and calmer Bill and Mary. Tom and Bill had been friends all their lives, having known each other since they were 10 years old when they ran the streets together, and fortunately their wives got along equally well with each other. Bill was fit, played golf, and did activities that didn't require much effort. Mary went to the gym and swam with Helen. Her shoulder-length blonde hair and blue eyes matched her ebullient personality. Both were extremely popular among a wide circle of friends. Most of the passengers were a group of rugby players, but only 5 of them survived. Another couple survived the disaster. Mike and Kelly were in their 20s. There was also a lone woman who was seriously wounded and remained unconscious. The last survivor was Margaret, their leader, a 57-year-old widow and retired nurse. They were at the furthest point of their tour in an aging twin-engine turboprop aircraft when a storm suddenly hit. For several hours, they were carried by a strong wind, under thunder and lightning. Tom wondered if anyone else knew about their predicament, and his doubts grew when the pilot announced that they would have to make an emergency landing and that everyone should get ready. The impact of the landing was brutal, and the small plane was torn in half after it overshot the intended beach and crashed into the water and then into a reef. The immediate consequences were mass death, injury, and shock. Survival became the priority. All that was visible now was the back of the plane, hanging precariously on the reef as the survivors, their clothes torn, reached the shore. There was little of value left on the destroyed plane: some food, clothing, and a first aid kit, which did little to help them survive the first night, as the storm was still raging. The next day was completely quiet and calm. During their initial searches, they discovered several shelters made from ship planks that had long since been overgrown by the jungle. They guessed that the boards were from a 19th century clipper ship. Then they discovered skeletons. There were 12 of them, and judging by the position of the bodies and the discarded weapons, they died in battle. This was confirmed when a ship's log was found, in which their exploits and a map of the island were recorded. Fortunately, the latter contained useful information about water and food sources. Apparently, there were wild pigs on the island. It was also confirmed that the island was uninhabited at that time. The survivors of the ship remained alone for almost 3 years and, like themselves, had no idea about their whereabouts, since they were blown off course during a storm that lasted several weeks. Over the course of several evenings, Margaret read out their story. More than 20 people survived the first crash, but over time, they lost more people due to injury and illness. At the end of the journal, petty arguments were recorded that gave rise to resentment and eventually hatred, exacerbated by isolation, fear, and lack of food. "Oh my God," Tom remarked, "this looks like Lord of the Flies." He then outlined the plot of the book, in which a group of boys, also marooned on an island, turned on each other with savage cruelty. Partly because of the magazine and some disagreements within their group, They decided to elect a leader and agree on some principles. Margaret was chosen quickly and without any opposition. The principles were more complex, but they settled on the following. Survival is the main goal, including food, water, and shelter. Alarm was chosen as the next priority. Tom suggested collecting all mirrors and shiny surfaces to signal, but he ignored Adam's rugby team captain, quipped that the tail of an airplane was a more obvious signal. There was no point in arguing. The fact that the plane was washed away the next day later proved his point. They also agreed to support the beacons and work together as a community, sharing everything. All decisions will be made for the benefit of the entire group by the leader, but on key issues everyone will have a say. Bill added another priority, burying the dead, both recent and skeletal. Sad to add, they now include Amy, a lone traveler who died peacefully in her sleep without ever regaining consciousness. Partly to record her death, Tom began recording their history in the ship's log. The group started out quite well. They had shelter and water, but there was not enough food, so they organized food production, hunting, and underwater fishing. At first they were sure that they would be found, but they never saw a single plane. Tom realized that they had been drifting for several hours during the storm and wondered if there was even a flight plan, since the airfield was rudimentary at best, nothing more than a rough grass track. He also questioned how bad the storm was in the region, and if everyone was recovering from the cyclone, would they even look for a small, occasional charter flight? However, I decided to keep this information to myself. As hope for a quick rescue faded, outbursts of anger began to appear. A few weeks later, quarrels began over the women with accusations of flirting. Mostly it was between younger husband Mike and members of the rugby team, whom he accused of groping his wife, Kelly. Tom noticed that the captain of the rugby team, Adam, was constantly hanging around his wife, Helen, and the youngest guy on the team, Dan, was constantly hanging around Mary. He tried to quietly inform Helen of this so as not to start another argument. She was rather dismissive of his concerns. It didn't help that their clothes were becoming more and more threadbare, revealing quite a bit of bare skin. Things came to blows when Zach, one of the rugby players, punched Kelly's husband Mike, who hit back in a rage. By the time they were separated, rugby player Zach was unconscious and bleeding heavily. Margaret called for restraint, pointing out that they did not have medical supplies and would not be able to treat serious injuries. The rugby players were furious over their friend's injury, and discontent between factions was rapidly growing. It was Adam who explained that they should have everything in common, but there is something that they did not share. The three married guys were furious. It almost came to another fight. Margaret only managed to calm the situation by telling everyone to separate and cool down. Margaret discussed her problems with each of the wives, subtly asking if any of them wanted to offer comfort to the young guys, their testosterone clearly on edge. Helen, as always, was direct and to the point. "Do you mean full-fledged sex?" "I haven't gotten to that point yet. We're just exploring all the possibilities. Our husbands will never tolerate this." Mike might give in to Kelly. He didn't want to hurt Zach at all. Opinions were divided and no decision was made. "Try mentioning this to your husbands. Let's see what they say. Expect them to be against it, but read between the words to see if there is any hidden recognition of how precarious our position is." The ensuing discussions led to nothing other than increasing tensions. They discussed the matter again in a meeting with everyone present. Adam demanded, due to the importance of the issue and the current impasse, that a vote be held. Margaret agreed, but only to see how things were going. All women had a choice in this matter. 4 young boys voted in favor of comfort sharing, as it was phrased, and 3 husbands voted against it. Mary and Kelly also voted against it. Everything is almost decided, Tom thought, but was completely stunned when Helen voted yes. He looked at her in complete bewilderment. Since Zach was unable to vote despite Adam's statement that he would be in favor, Margaret now had the deciding vote. Margaret noticed the tension and insisted that everyone consider their votes, as nothing would happen for several days. "I would encourage you all to discuss the possible consequences. Our continued survival depends on it." Helen tried to explain, her voice to Tom. This is serious, we are already quarreling, and everything can only escalate. Zach may not survive what you think will happen if he dies. Compared to this, a small affair is nothing. This is funny. They are half your age. This will cause even more quarrels and resentments, and you seem to be to carry it away. Look around, Tom. There's no one their age here except Kelly, and she's already having to deal with everyone fighting over her. It is natural that they need female company. At their age, they should be dating, and they have not gone on a date for several months. We are lost and trying to survive. In this situation, social norms do not apply. Who knows when or even if we get off this island, you can't expect 20-year-old guys to suddenly become celibate indefinitely. How convenient for you. We can't expect it, but it looks like we can throw away the vows we made to each other. It's only a big problem if you make it so. This doesn't mean I think less of you. But you didn't think that I could think worse about you, my future unfaithful wife. Of course, I thought about it, but I know that you understand my reasons and are strong enough to cope with the situation. What will happen if Adam demands to take power? You won't be able to fight everyone. We need a way to appease them. Margaret spoke quietly with Kelly and Mary, asking about the consequences depending on how the vote went. Specifically, whether they would agree to make a group decision on an issue that they, as individuals, had every right to reject. This was not a decision she wanted to force on the wives. A few days later, Margaret appeared before the group. As I already explained, we cannot afford to get injured. Even minor cuts and bruises can become infected and fatal. We have no effective medicine and nothing that would help Zach recover. I talked to all of you young guys. You admitted that you were upset and angry, not knowing how long we would be here. We cannot ask you not to be attracted to the opposite sex, and you do not have the opportunity to do what comes naturally now. We must accept that this is an isolated, emergency situation. In this environment, normal expectations and boundaries no longer apply. We have a different type of community where we have agreed that everything is shared and we take care of all of us as a group. The arguments were still the same ones Helen had given earlier. Tom wondered if they had gathered together to agree on their script. I'm glad to offer myself, but I understand that at 57 years old, I may be unattractive to young men. I think I would make the same offer if I were younger and in your shoes. You know, I was pretty sexy back in the day. She added the last comment, trying to bring a little humor to a difficult situation. Greg, one of the young guys, burst into the conversation. I would like to accept this offer, and I think that you are still very attractive, and I really appreciate that you are willing to do so. It would be an honor for me. Margaret smiled. Thank you, I agree. And if and when Zach gets better, I will take care of him too. There remained an equal number of wives and unmarried men. The math and conclusions were obvious. One at a time. Mary tried to suppress her feelings of panic. Now everything was becoming too real. She said she would support the overall decision, as would Kelly. I instruct each wife to take a lover. This is my decision as a leader. Don't blame or try to change anyone's mind. We all have to accept this for the good of the group as a whole. This is absolute nonsense, Bill growled. You can't vote for someone to do this or vote for us to just accept it. All the wives agreed to accept the results of the vote, Bill. Margaret tried to say it kindly, but it didn't help. Judging by the devastated look Bill stared at Mary, Margaret continued, each wife will draw the straw. The one who draws the longest straw will choose her lover first, after which the wives will be obliged to take care of his needs in the same way as their husbands. There should be no relationship outside of these agreements. Lovers should treat both wives and husbands with absolute respect, understanding that this can cause great stress and difficulty. Nothing will happen for a few days until we get used to the idea and we have everything under control. Tom ran away, quickly followed by Bill. Helen and Mary ran after them, trying to convince them that everything was for the best and that everything would work out. The next day, Mary found Helen looking at young guys. Deciding which one you like? Life on the island seemed ordinary to Helen, and she was forced to admit that she liked looking at young guys. They are all in such good physical shape. with developed muscles and tone. The idea of taking care of some of their needs seemed very attractive. "Have you seen Adam? He's so fit." Mary smiled. "Yes, it's hard not to notice him." And Steve began to walk around with a boner, not paying attention to those around him. "To survive, we need smart young guys." "Oh, I don't know, your Tom actually works harder. He's the only one who can hunt and fish with any success. The younger guys are just better posers." "So, what do you think about this? Did you vote against the agreements?" "I think I don't mind. But this is not something I would have thought about before the accident. But I'm worried about Bill. He doesn't talk much. I think he can handle it, if I'm attentive to him." Helen didn't pay much attention as she watched Adam approach. Her mind was occupied with comparisons to Brad Pitt in the movie Troy. "Hi, Helen. I just wanted to ask if this happens. Do you already know who you would choose?" "Not really. I assumed you all would want Kelly to choose you. She's 23 and pretty after all." "Oh, I don't know. You and Mary are very attractive, mature women. I'm sure either of us would be happy if you want to take care of us. I hope you'll consider me as an option." "Actually, I'm shocked." "Why me?" "Well, mainly because I like you as a person. We get along well, and this could become a long-term thing. But physically, you are hot." "But she hardly looks like Kelly." "Yes, but I like you better. Your figure, slender, like an hourglass, and Kelly is flatter. I like your curves. This is a real female figure. To put it bluntly, I would say that your tits are huge and I can't take my eyes off them. Your ass is in great shape too. One thing I can say for sure, I would love to take possession of you." Adam laughed to himself and added, "I like your eyes and face." The next day, Adam was at the stream completely naked and washing himself when he saw Helen approaching. She stood spellbound. Adam smiled, allowing her to clearly see himself in all his glory, and finally Helen averted her eyes and disappeared. At the same time, Mary was talking to Dan. "Can I just say that if this happens, I hope you will consider me?" Mary was puzzled. "I'm much older than you. How old are you, 25? 23. But I like you. I really like you. You're funny, easy to talk to, and so caring. You and Margaret are the glue that holds us all together." "Oh yes, I didn't know you thought of me like that." "There is one more thing. You are a confident, experienced woman, and I think that you could guide me." "Lord, I'm not a sex therapist or a teacher." "Sure?" Mary laughed. "Oh, you are an impudent one." Subsequently, Mary thought about it. After all, she is an experienced married woman, and Dan is so young. Obviously, the guys made their choice and tried to establish emotional connections with married women before the selection began. This was very timely and purposeful, as Margaret announced that the selection would take place the next day, which immediately led to a moment of connection between the wives and lovers. Tom sat in the group and waited in horror for this moment. He was sure that the women had thought through their choices in advance to avoid any conflict, and he would end up with the worst possible outcome. 3 wives drew straws, with Helen drawing the longest, giving her first choice. She approached Adam, smiled, and led him by the hand to one of the shelters. The look of joy on Adam's face was the polar opposite of Tom's expression of rage. He thought about running after them, but she had made up her mind, and it was her own free choice. He sat motionless, trying to hold back the bile rising in his stomach. Mary came next and chose Dan. She nodded to him but did not move to go with him. Kelly remained Steve. Mary turned to her husband, Bill. "Why don't you, Tom and Mike, go and wander around? It will be easier." She waited until they started to get ready and then walked over to Dan. Just before leaving the camp, Tom heard Helen's first moans of passion. He could not stand it and rushed forward. When the husbands returned about an hour later, everyone was sitting around the fire except Helen and Adam. Mary tried to stop Tom as he approached the shelter. "Tom, don't..." He looked inside and heard muffled conversation. "You like what's going on, don't you, Helen?" "Yes, I like it." "Whose are you now?" "Yours, all yours, beloved." Tom turned, picked up his backpack, and left the camp. The rest of the camp looked at each other awkwardly, but realized that it was better not to try to stop him. Eventually, Helen and Adam left the shelter and returned to the fire. Noticing Tom's absence, Helen looked at Mary. "They got back about 30 minutes ago. You were still busy." He looked into the shelter and ran away. Helen panicked. 30 minutes ago? Damn. "What's the matter?" Mary asked worriedly. "I said something, and if he heard it, then everything is bad," Adam intervened, placing his hand on Helen's thigh. "Don't worry, Helen, he must accept the new order of things. And if he doesn't accept it, that means we'll have more time." Helen ignored Adam, thinking that it was idiotic of her to get carried away and have a third round with him, and even more foolish to engage in conversations about sex. The first time was frantic and fast, the second was calmer, but no less exciting. She was amazed when the third one started, and it seemed like they were having sex forever. To be honest, Helen was tired, and talking about sex was meant to make him relax. Mary talked to Bill, trying to calm him down. "How are you doing about all this?" Bill shrugged. "Actually, it's pretty damn bad." "Sorry, I never thought it would be so difficult. Dan was normal, if that helps. Respectful and attentive. He knows how difficult this is for you. We didn't have sex, I just offered him some release." Bill looked at her in confusion. "We kissed. We thought it would be easier to wait until you went hunting." Maybe at least you're not as obviously impatient as Helen. It might be easier to just announce that we are no longer married or together." "What? No, never say that. I love you more than anything in the world. Nothing will change that. It will just help us survive. If the group breaks up, we will become like those skeletons, turning on each other." "Don't be so sure that your decisions won't lead to this, Mary." This pent-up anger goes both ways. Tom didn't return that night, despite what the young boys thought. Tom was more competent than any of them, but his current mental state could be guessed. Despite her worries, Helen allowed Adam into bed with her again that night. His toned body was simply irresistible. Mary spent the night with her husband Bill and tried to warn her friend to focus on her husband. When Tom did not return the next morning, they decided to send search parties. Tom hunted for 2 days and for the first time did not return to camp with the results, but alone enjoyed the sweet taste of a wild pig. He heard the search parties and easily bypassed them, returning to the main camp. Unfortunately, Helen was there waiting for him, alone. Seeing him, she lowered her eyes. He paid no attention to her and sat down by the fire. She asked if they could talk. Tom thought that sooner or later this would happen. "I regret the way I treated Adam. It was more harsher than I wanted." "Wow, sincere apologies," Tom chuckled. "And then we got carried away, and I didn't want you to see or hear this." "No, I think you wanted to maintain intimacy for your young boyfriend, whom you have been pursuing for several weeks, and who now owns you." Helen closed her eyes as she heard the echo of her own words. "Come on, Tom. Grow up. You know that this is all talk, part of increasing desire and arousing someone. All this is nonsense, and his pride requires feeding. You know what, Helen? I don't believe a single word you say anymore. Look at me, Tom. I'm already over 40. In the real world, I wouldn't have this chance. What if it was Jennifer Lawrence or Scarlett Johansson dropped in here and they needed sexual release? Would you actually say no or secretly satisfy them? Which would be even worse. Maybe you just don't know me as well as you think. But let's say you're right, and I couldn't resist. I wouldn't rub it in your face. You barely waited until you had your first choice. I didn't leave you, but I admit that I got carried away. Forgive me." "Why him? He's such a moron, an arrogant jerk and pretty useless in terms of helping us survive. He can't do a damn thing. Your sex with him is not for the sake of survival, but only because you wanted it. You clearly don't regret doing this. You're just sorry that you seem too keen." "Well, yes, there is probably something in this. I'm not going to pick the smallest, least attractive guy to boost your ego. I like Adam, and you have to accept that, and accept that this is a different reality." "So what? There won't even be an apology? I just have to come to terms with it?" I think then it's clear to me where I am. Eventually, the others returned to camp. Margaret talked to everyone, trying to forestall the inevitable discontent and anger. She thought that if they could survive the next few days, everything would calm down. She was furious with Adam and Helen. Their actions jeopardized the entire plan. Now Tom is a problem. He sits a little away from the group and only Bill seems to be able to get him to talk. Margaret announced that they needed to agree on some rules to ease the tension caused by the implementation of consolation. She continued. The wives said that at home they have sex once or twice a week, so they have enough time to console their lovers without compromising their husband's routine. So we get 2 days, and they get 5? Bill shouted. No, we were thinking about a couple of days with each partner and breaks between them for the sake of rest. Kelly laughed. Yes, we may need a few days of rest. None of the guys laughed, and Kelly continued. Come on, if it's unpleasant for all of us, then what's the point? We should just have fun and not worry about it. In the real world, we wouldn't do this, but here it's just release, not love or a relationship. Husbands should not be neglected or embarrassed, Margaret said, looking straight at Helen and Adam. This is absolutely normal. I have never refused my husband. Tonight will be spent with the husbands to reconnect and let the lovers try to find some food for a change. We definitely need it. The couples themselves will agree, and if they don't agree on something, I will be the arbiter. Tom tried his best not to, but he couldn't stop himself from having sex with Helen. The sensations were completely different, as if you were sleeping with a stranger. The sex was rough. It was definitely just sex, and not lovemaking. The sights of Helen with Adam and her words tormented him. He was completely at a loss, and Helen felt it. You know that I'm yours, don't you? I don't like him. You have never felt less than mine, Helen. I am yours forever. Please don't doubt it. How do you want to organize our time together? You just can't wait. Do what you want. I will often go hunting. Don't be like that. We have to deal with this. You're still my priority. Helen dropped the subject, hoping that Tom would calm down, and wishing she had followed Mary's example and been more delicate. When she woke up the next day, Tom was gone. She thought he would calm down soon, although the lack of communication with her husband the previous night had worried her. Tom stayed away from the camp. Without the food he supplied, the others began to starve. Eventually, Bill tracked him down and discovered that Tom had built himself a mini-camp. Bill explained the situation. They fished and hunted together. Bill tried to learn and brought food to the camp. While Bill was tracking Tom, Mary was walking along the beach with Dan. How are things with Bill? I think he's coping. I understand that you are not doing this of your own free will, but I want you to like it. We shouldn't do anything you don't like. Mary smiled at Dan. You simply charm. She turned and kissed him. It was a hot, sultry kiss, fully exploring each other. His reaction was quite obvious, and Mary felt a sudden excitement before leading him back to the shelter. If Dan expected to see a timid and shy wife, he was mistaken. Mary unbuttoned her blouse, revealing her large breasts. I saw how you looked at them. Would you like to take a closer look at them? Mary decided that if she was going to do this, then she shouldn't hold back. Sexually, she was like possessed. Wow, you are the sexiest woman I have ever known. This is amazing. I don't know how to thank you. Mary caressed his face. I think I should be thanking you. Tom turned to Bill. How do you deal with it, seeing Mary with another guy? Bill shrugged. I just try not to pay attention to it. It's easier to cope if you just forget about what could be happening between them. And I can't seem to cope with this at all. Mary makes it easier than Helen. She at least seems reserved and constantly checks on how I'm doing. And our time together seems to be the same. Tom's time away from the group allowed him to explore the island. He made the difficult climb to the highest point and was able to make out another distant island, as well as a spot on the horizon that might just be another island. This made him wonder if their island was part of the archipelago chain. While checking out another cove for potential fishing spots, he saw this. An old dugout canoe made from a tree trunk was washed up on the high tide line. He pulled it out and examined it. It was almost intact, but sat low in the water. Over the next few days, he managed to repair it and make a crude oar. He sailed it towards the main camp, thinking it was surprisingly durable. The others were surprised to see it and rejoiced, thinking that the canoe would improve their chances of catching more fish. Tom and Bill set to work to make better oars, using oars from an old shipwreck. Having finished their work, they tried to fish, each time going further and further. For added stability, they added external floats and practiced stowing water, food, and spare oars by attaching them to the canoe with string made from leaves. Even though Tom returned to the main camp, he continued to ignore Helen. 3 weeks have passed since preparations began to consolidate the guys. Helen tried to talk to Tom again. "I miss you very much, Tom. Please stay with me in the camp. I only gave it to Adam for 2 nights, even though you weren't here. And what do you want? A medal. Others accepted it. Why can't you? You know that Kelly, Michael, and Steve feel comfortable together, constantly sharing shelter. And Bill has adjusted to Mary looking after Dan. Can't you find a way?" "No, I can't. But you got your wish." "It wasn't my desire. I'm so lonely without you, Adam, to be honest. He's a bit of an asshole. Please take me back. Sorry, I really liked him and got carried away. I didn't mean to seem so impatient or to neglect you. I just wanted to get it over with." "Stop it, Helen. You were more than enthusiastic and were hardly in a hurry to end this." "Okay, I meant that I wanted to figure everything out and work it out. I still want us to be together. I hate the idea that you are all alone. Please let me keep an eye on you. The whole idea was to avoid any conflict. You got what you wanted and you barely thought about me. You treated me like crap. Actually, you shouldn't do that to someone you claim to love. But I love you. I thought you could handle it. You are stronger than any of us. You know, I think that, at least in this, you are right." Tom explained his idea to Bill and Margaret. He would use a canoe to try to get to the next island, and from there, see if there was a second one. If this is an archipelago, then there may be more islands and he will be able to jump from one to another, perhaps crossing sea routes and having a chance of salvation. They both thought he was crazy, but he and Bill set to work preparing. News of his plan quickly became common knowledge. Helen approached Tom as he loaded a barrel of water onto the canoe. "Please tell me it's not because of what I did." Tears were streaming down her face. "This is suicide. Don't go. I'll break up with Adam. I have to try. This place is driving me crazy, and not just me." Tom himself was surprised at how little he now valued Helen's opinion. Once upon a time, he would have done everything not to upset her, but not now. Tom asked Bill to stay and look after their wives. "I suppose they have other men willing to do it." "Maybe, but you and Mary still have something going on, and this one-person thing has less impact. I have a better chance alone. The supplies will last longer." Bill couldn't argue with that logic, but he also understood that his friend was simply protecting him. This attempt was almost suicide. The farewell was emotional. Everyone came, even Adam, although he kept his distance. They hugged him and wished him luck. Tom was even able to hug a sobbing Helen. As he watched Tom slowly disappear, Adam thought it was a win-win. Either they would be rescued or he would have Helen forever, and he was looking forward to their first night together. That thought quickly dissipated as he approached her. "Fuck off. We might as well kill him. He is a better man than you will ever be, and I threw him away." Margaret overheard the comment and thought the assessment was pretty accurate. She regretted her involvement in this whole sad story and the loss of her best hunter and breadwinner. It was incredibly difficult to row, especially with the currents and winds pushing him off course to the east. He was glad that he had done so many training swims and built up some muscle. At times he saw shark fins and quickly pulled out baited hooks. It took Tom 2 days to reach the island, which he saw from the top of the mountain. He waited out the weather, found some fresh water, and tried to use the high ground to determine his destination, and was disheartened. There was absolutely nothing in sight. Perhaps the second island was just a cloud. He could turn back, a smart decision. He had almost enough supplies, or he could sail on. Thoughts about the survivors on the old plane helped him make the decision to sail on. He decided to sail east again, hoping that any archipelago should continue in roughly the same direction, if there were other islands there. After 3 days of paddling, with very little sleep and dizziness from dehydration, he spotted another island and landed near a deep crevice in the jungle canopy, in hopes of finding fresh water. The landing was difficult due to the reef surf, but he managed and, to his delight, found a freshwater stream from which he drank greedily. When he woke up next to the stream, he did not know whether he lost consciousness or simply fell asleep. He rested and drank often, terribly pleased that he could urinate again. Slightly refreshed, but left with almost no food. He again had to make the same decision: head further east and hope for the best, or return. But he didn't think that he would have enough food to return, and he set off again, quickly losing track of the hours and then the days. The food had long since run out and the water dried up on the 4th day. The sea seemed endless. Water. Water everywhere and not a drop to drink. The lines from Coleridge's poem have never been more appropriate. From fatigue, he could no longer row and let the canoe drift. In a brief glimmer of consciousness, he vaguely thought that everything was hopeless, but at least he had made a good attempt. Then, on the 5th day, he saw it. The boat. Remembered the mirror in his backpack, was able to pull it out and used it to reflect the sunlight and try to signal the ship. Not a boat, but a ship. And he approached. He laughed internally. Fuck you, Adam. The mirror worked after all. Tom remembered almost nothing of what happened next, only some memories of the ship and mentions of others. He was taken off the ship by a military helicopter and taken to hospital, by which time he was hallucinating and severely dehydrated. Despite this, he did a good job of describing the islands and where the others were. The next few weeks were a succession of hospitals, procedures, and questions from authorities and insurance companies. Tom had an emotional reunion with Helen, and then with the entire group. They thanked him repeatedly for allowing them to survive. Margaret told Tom that just before the rescue, the group had agreed that the conditions of comfort did not need to be mentioned or communicated to anyone else. Bill did not forget to pick up the old ship's log and gave it to Tom as a keepsake, and in gratitude for the fact that his old friend saved him. There was a media storm surrounding their story. Suddenly there were requests for all kinds of television interviews, magazine articles, and press publications. Tom and Bill tried to avoid this. The rest of the group, including their wives, were not so restrained. One of the book publishers already had ghostwriters working on the book and film adaptation, and a whole support team began giving interviews and writing series about their time on the island. Tom and Bill began to resent the content of some. In some memoirs, the authors took credit for what they did not do. Because Tom and Bill provided little information, it was easier for the publishers to portray Adam as the heroic leader who saved the group. Tom and Bill sat together reflecting on their marriages. Bill stated that Mary repeatedly apologized for going to the island with Dan and asked if they could leave everything there, saying that the circumstances were so difficult that it had nothing to do with their normal life together. Bill tried his best to do just that. No doubt she tried her best to shield him from her actions, and he hoped they would return to normal. Tom nodded, saying that Helen says about the same thing, but they are still distant from each other. There is an emotional emptiness, and they hardly talk. Helen tried to reconcile with Tom again, saying that he should be allowed to be celebrated as the hero who saved them all, rather than sit in the shadows in the background. I'd rather focus on saving our marriage, but you seem more concerned about this whole media circus. We can make a lot of money from this circus, and I want to be proud of my husband for saving us, and for us to be together as a couple, like everyone else. I haven't done anything to be ashamed of, and I don't understand why I'm an outcast. At least I was honest about my desires. Not like Mary. What about Mary? Nothing. What exactly? Well, she was hardly innocent. Long before they agreed on consolation, she and Margaret were satisfying the guys. That's where it all started. And yet, she came out of it like a saint, her marriage intact. Tom was shocked and faced a dilemma. Should he tell Bill? Helen may have lied or exaggerated to make herself look better. The book's release was approaching. Even Tom could not avoid the event that would mark the signing of the film agreement. The TV special to support the book was to include interviews with them all. Tom and Bill were dressed in suits that they could not get used to. Their wives, however, looked absolutely stunning. Elegant evening dresses emphasized the weight she had lost and the deep natural tan she had acquired while on the island. Helen hugged Mary as soon as they saw each other. They immediately talked about the state of their marriages. At the far end of the room, they saw Adam, Dan, Greg, and Steve. Zach was still in the long-term rehabilitation unit. God, just look at them. They look like a walking dream, all washed and cleaned. Do you miss Dan? Well, I mean, the sex? Mary stopped and looked around before whispering, honestly, yes, he was young, energetic, and handsome. And the sex was honestly a revelation, so yes, I really miss him. But all is still not well with Bill. Helen replied, we are far beyond smooth. Tom is definitely cold. I can't get through to him. Give him time, it's hard for them to come to terms with this. We can no longer pretend to be faithful wives, and we didn't really try to. Honestly, Mary, I think we're done. And if that's the case, then I'm wondering if I should give Adam one more try. The ensuing storm was started by Bill after he saw another video clip of Adam saying that he was the one who provided the most of the food for the group. He loudly proclaimed, "What nonsense!" Everything that Adam just described was done by Tom. Publishers hastened to intervene and tried to hush up this outbreak, saying that memories are different and that everyone has their own point of view. Bill was escorted out, but Adam was furious that he had been exposed. By the time Tom calmed Bill down and they returned to the main room, Adam and Dan were talking to Helen and Mary. Tom approached the small group. "And what do we have here? We're just getting to know your wives again." "That's right. Maybe we should meet you outside." "Come on, Tom, don't do that. We know each other intimately after all." Anyway, we were just asking if Helen and Mary were going to a party at the publisher's apartment. I'm guessing you guys won't want to come because you only contributed so little to the writing of the show, even though it made us all a ton of money. Tom turned to Helen. "And do you want to go?" Helen shrugged without answering. "Go to a party or go with this asshole?" "Well, we haven't had sex since we got back. Unless, of course, you want to take me back to your bed as your wife. I will be glad if you do this." "You're making the same choice again, Helen, only this time there's no excuse for survival." Adam intervened. "Come on, Tom. This is nothing new. We had sex hundreds of times on the island, and I remember that Helen always enjoyed it." Mary became alarmed. She pulled Bill aside and said quietly, "Don't mind Helen. She's trying to make Tom jealous so he'll take her back. It's just a party." "And you want to go to it?" "Yes, it is not of great importance, but it is part of the media requirements. However, given your previous outburst of emotions, it would be better if you did not go." "I understand then. Bye." He looked at her, hoping that she would not go. If Mary hadn't been looking at Dan, she might have noticed Bill's gaze or realized that he said, "Bye," instead of the usual, "Good evening." Anyway, she turned and left with the others. Adam looked back at Tom and grinned as they walked away. He had a clear intention of having sex with Helen, and Tom again couldn't do anything about it. He was almost sure that Dan would also make another attempt to get Mary. Tom and Bill reluctantly trudged toward the bar, defeated, their last hopes of their wives' return quickly fading. They sat in silence for several minutes, but it seemed like hours. "Well, how did we agree?" Bill answered with a long sigh. "Yes, I agree." The next day, Helen and Mary immediately rushed to the official promotional event, a series of blitz date-style interviews with various members of the press. Mary was still reproaching herself for falling asleep exhausted after talking with Dan. However, she was able to convince Bill that everything was innocent, and after a late finish, the publishers placed them in different numbers. Helen and Mary's first interview on national television began with an introduction and a few warm-up questions. "So, Mary, what is the secret of your survival?" "Well, I would say that in difficult times, we worked together, looked out for each other. That was our guiding principle." Helen: Weren't there any areas of conflict? There must have been some tension where survival was at stake. There were some things, but we overcame them by focusing on what was important. How are things going after you return home? To be honest, it's difficult to adapt. I think we are still recovering from what happened to us. There was news in this morning's papers that you actually cared about some guys more than others. What? What do you have in mind? Your husbands have just published excerpts from their own memoirs about the island, which indicate that the women on the island were quite accommodating. What? Volume? He could not. Do you know who the father of Kelly's child is? What? Oh God. Kelly is pregnant? How are Adam and Dan doing, Mary? We understand you were with them last night. At this point, bedlam began. Mary ran away, sobbing, while more and more press gathered to ask questions. The publishers tried their best to save both women. Bill, reluctantly agreeing with Tom, said, "I never thought Mary would leave with them again. Thanks for telling me about what she did on the island." Margaret also admitted the truth when I cornered her. This gave them the go-ahead to move forward. The old ship's log, which Tom kept, described in detail all the events on the island. Upon returning home, he gave it to a friend who worked for a Sunday newspaper. His friend worked with Tom and Bill to draft articles and write a major series. The newspaper was eager to publish the article, especially since it completely undermined the official version of the large publishing house, but they needed confirmation from Tom or Bill. They were worried Tom would pull out, but agreed that holding her back would make the story even bigger. They will be able to take advantage of the official launch advertisement, using it to boost sales with a juicy sensation. Serial publications and short inserts can cost a fortune. Tom held back, worried about Mary and Bill, but everything changed. Mary's decision to go to the party sealed their fates. The true story was revealed as soon as possible. The press speculated about what had happened, and it began to be called Love Island. The wives were ashamed. When Helen and Mary read the newspapers, they cried, "My God, this is worse than I thought. This makes us look like complete sluts." Adam, Dan, and Steve fared no better. By seducing the wife of the guy who saved your life and taking credit for his achievements, they were disgraced and ostracized. Finally, Tom and Bill agreed to meet with their wives on the condition that they signed the divorce papers that the lawyers were working on. "Why did you do this to us, Tom?" "What? Did you tell the truth? You said you had nothing to be ashamed of, and you didn't do anything wrong. So I shared that sentiment, just like you announced your little vote on the island. Lord Tom, you ruined us, me, Mary, and everyone else. I think I gave you about as much attention as you gave me on this fucking island. I have no sympathy for any of the women or guys who had fun with you while living off our hard work. The only people I cared about were Bill and Mike, and they were okay with it." Mike? What does he have to do with all this? It turns out that Kelly was planning to run away with Steve if he turned out to be the father of her child. You all deserve each other. I had no idea that we offended you so much. More likely you didn't care. But in any case, I must thank you. For what? You gave me the incentive to go and save myself. Otherwise, we would all still be there. Some of us may have had more fun than others. Mary interrupted him, turning to Bill. I was trying to be careful and protect you, Bill. It was about survival. Do we have any chance? No. You were doing this just like Helen, but behind my back. She was at least honest about this, and that night at the party after the interview showed your true nature. Don't bother denying it. Mary lowered her eyes, blushing. I do not like him. I believe not. But if you don't love me, that's even worse. It means you left us for simple sex. I hope it was worth it. Mary began to sob. Of course, he wasn't worth it. I became greedy and stupid. I want us to live together so we can do everything we planned. I beg you, take me back, Bill. I'll do whatever you want. I want the wife I had before that trip, but you can't offer that anymore. She's gone. So now I want you to leave me alone forever. This comment caused Mary to cry hysterically. Helen was made of sterner stuff. She refused to cry, but she also couldn't keep her head held high. Tom ended the meeting. Goodbye, Helen, and please, Don't stay in touch. For the survivors, money became an issue. The official book had to be withdrawn as it was extremely discredited, and all proposals were withdrawn. Publishers have also filed damage claims to recoup their costs. Accident insurance payments helped them stay afloat. Tom and Bill had no such problems, as their memoirs became bestsellers. They have put off negotiating further deals until their divorces are settled. Reputation is another matter. The spouses were shunned in their hometown. Mary's conservative family completely disowned her. She moved out, but was hounded by the press every step of the way. Helen tried to bluff by telling the press that she had done nothing wrong. We survived. Without these actions, we would have quarreled and worked against each other. People shouldn't make comments until they find themselves in a live or die situation. Her answer even won her a few supporters. She was notorious and a popular target for young ladies' men. Although no one would risk having the real relationship with her that she craved, she simply couldn't be trusted. Tom and Bill remained best friends and continued their travels. Wealth made life easier, and adventures became more and more, because now neither of them needed to work. In addition, during their travels they met women. Neither of them was in a hurry to settle down, and both were a little shy, but were full of optimism that this would happen in due time. But for now, it was a lot of fun to practice. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one.